So warmly welcome to Ynzo. Thanks for accepting this and joining us in this online format that opens up to having people from all over the world doing these kind of events. So that's really great. And I thought maybe I should say something about CMS. That's a general thing for the people listening, but also for you. And maybe we can share the web page that we have as well. See if that works. Yeah. Yeah, so most of you probably joining in if you're students at CMS or have been connected to CMS in other ways. You heard this story before, but CMS being a educational university center, a collaboration then between Uppsala University and the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. And it stands for then the Center for Environment and Development Studies. And it's mainly student-led university courses, mostly part-time courses. And a couple of courses are part of a master's program in sustainable development, but it's mostly freestanding courses that you take as a student interested in sustainability, connected to other studies that you're doing at the universities here in Uppsala. And there's a ton of different events happening each semester, outreach events that we are doing, like this one. But there's also other things you can connect to on the webpage. And that's my dog, who's also always joining me from home. There's something at the door. Just ignore him. So that's CMS in a very short note. We've been around for almost 30 years, so it's a long tradition of doing student-led courses and trying to engage with these issues and engage with the world. So let's stop that share. And the story around this and how I kind of came across the chocolate and all of this. I'm not going to do a long story out of this, but I crashed with my bike, which was okay. I was just, I ended up fine. And that was, that was fine. I had to go to the hospital and everything. So one of the guests we had at our cabin, she handed this piece of chocolate from this brand that I hadn't seen before. And as I was kind of messed up, I didn't think that much about it, but then I got kind of dizzy because I hadn't eaten enough and everything. So, and then I found this chocolate thing, and then it kind of saved me during the night in the hospital from passing out. And then I didn't think much about it and came back to the cabin a couple of weeks later and found like the last of the chocolate and this paper wrapping around it. And it was really warm in August. I was just outside resting and reading the story about your chocolate company, and I just got this feeling that, well, maybe this is the kind of people we should invite and have really interesting conversations around the work that you're doing, and also that it's not only like you're not only celebrating yourself and the chocolate you're doing, you're also trying to do something more than just sell a product that consumers can be okay with. It's trying to also to change the world in a bigger sense, and that's kind of what CMS has also been about, and try to do more than just sustainability and the small courses we do. We try to reach beyond that. So that is kind of the framing of how I ended up with getting in contact with your brand, and also then getting in contact with you since I sent the invitation. So that's really good. And I thought we do this more as a conversation. It's also being recorded so people can watch it later. So I think that's really good. And I don't know if you want to do an introduction or around the work that you do with your company, or if we should just jump into questions directly and around this. It might be good do you have some kind of background on your work?
Whatever you feel like. Honestly, I can give you a couple of minutes maybe of background, and then we dive into a conversation. So let me see whether I can open up something here. But feel free to stop me if I go on too long, okay? Because I have that tendency. In the world of cocoa, unfortunately, there's a very bitter reality to the sweet story of chocolate, which is the fact that even today in 2020, there's still more than 1.5 million children working in illegal circumstances in the two major cocoa producing countries in the world that are Ghana and Ivory Coast. And those children, more than 95% of those 1.5 million children even work under hazardous situations. So that means that they're small kids walk around with machetes or work with chemicals or work with heavy machinery. And the very worst case is at least 30,000 children are subject to something that can really be considered modern slavery. So those are kids that are forced to do unpaid labor outside of family environment often, and in a product that's not an essential thing for anybody in the world, at least not too many people, at least. So that is the core of the issue in the cocoa industry, and unfortunately, it's a very unknown situation. So what we do, let me go back then in history. 15 years ago, there were a couple of just Dutch journalists that ran into this issue, and they saw it in a tiny news article in a newspaper on page 12, and they were like, what? How can this not be front page news? How come not everybody knows about this? And let me turn this one off because it's not really necessary. And they started creating awareness around the subject and ended up starting a chocolate company, Tony's Chocolate Only. Tony's, the international name for the Dutch journalist Teun, and Choco Lonely for his lonely battle in the chocolate industry. And we never intended to become a successful, let alone large, let alone globally available chocolate brand. But we have grown to that in about 15 years, and especially the last 7, 8, 9 years, we've grown really rapidly, becoming market leaders in the Netherlands. We're available in Scandinavia, Finland, Germany, Belgium, France, UK, US. So really becoming, I wouldn't say a global brand, but at least a globally available brand by now. And what we do is we try to create as much awareness around the situation of the cocoa industry. We try to show the industry from within that chocolate can be made in a different way, in a more sustainable way. And lastly, we want to inspire other organizations to also take their responsibility. So this, what you now see, is really our 3-step strategy that we always go by. And in creating that example for other companies to follow, we strongly believe in a 5-step approach. So that it means taking full responsibility for your complete value chain. For us, that means completely traceable cocoa beans that we source from now 8,500 farmers in Ghana and Ivory Coast. And that direct and long-term relationship is relevant because we then are able to pay a higher price directly to those farmers for the cocoa beans that we buy from them. So on top of the, let's say, market price, we pay Tony's premium, and on top of the Tony's premium, a fair trade premium, and on top of the fair trade premium, we pay an additional Tony's premium to bridge the gap towards the living income, which for us simply means that you're able to have a roof over your head, you're able to feed your whole family, you're able to send your kids to school, which is essential for us. And hopefully also you're able to invest a little bit in a positive spiral upwards instead of the constant negative spiral downwards that these farmers are experiencing for decades or even centuries in a row. And then furthermore, we help them increase the quality of the beans that they deliver to us, and we help them increase the productivity of their farms. And then lastly, we help those cooperatives that they're united in. So we work with 7 cooperatives in Ghana and Ivory Coast. We help them to have a stronger stand towards the buyers in the value chain of cocoa. So really through financial management support, through consultancy on the ground, and really just getting them up to par. So that is, in a sense, how we try to make a difference in the world of cocoa. We've launched a initiative where we, together with, at the moment, the biggest retailer in the Netherlands, but also the biggest chocolate manufacturer in the world, Barry Callebaut, so Callebaut for in a foreign pronunciation, where we work together to make sure that other companies don't need to reinvent the wheel, so they can just do what we've been doing. Or as I sometimes say, we might be the only company that wants to get rid of the U in USP, because we don't want to be unique in what we're doing. We want everybody to simply copy what we're doing and hopefully even improve on that. So that is in a nutshell what we do. And by making unequally divided bars, as you see in the picture right now, we really show through our bars the reality in the unequally divided world of cocoa, whereby our bars really become a discussion piece that forces people to tell this story to the person next to them. And that is really, in a nutshell, how we believe a small company can make a dent in a rusted down industry, and how it's not about us making 100% slave-free chocolate, but it's about working together with governments, with other cocoa or other chocolate manufacturers, with chocolate lovers, with cocoa farmers, and with consumers to make sure that all chocolate worldwide becomes 100% slave-free. So that is, Daniel, the shortest nutshell of Tony's I can give you. So we can dive into questions and a conversation if you want.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I should encourage everybody else also, you can just jump into the discussion, ask your question or raise your hand or add your question also to the chat if you want to do that. Or if you just want to add something, comment to the discussion. But I'm also curious, I mean, Samus is also built on the kind of personal engagement, or that you find that something is wrong in the world, or there's something wrong with your studies, or that you have a passion for something, you come in contact with Samus and you have that engagement. So I'm thinking also about you. How did you start working at a chocolate company that has this kind of profile, and also what is it kind of, what in your engagement kind of keeps you going and doing this work? Oh, now we can't hear you, actually. You're not muted, but it might be something with the technology. Yep.
There you go. I think this should be better by now.
Yep, that works.
Perfect. So you're asking my personal, how I came to Tony's.
Yeah, your personal journey and how you get, how do you start working at a chocolate company? That's kind of like a child's dream for some people, but also getting involved in this kind of social entrepreneurship or that kind of field.
Yeah. So I used to run a company called Innocent Drinks. So that's a smoothie company from the UK, and I used to run the Benelux branch. I would say my UK counterparts would say the European branch, but back then I still considered them part of Europe. I ran that together with a university friend of mine. And after about 5 years, we sold our stock and we went our ways. I became an independent consultant, and then he started looking for a chocolate brand, and in the end ended up buying a minority share and then the majority share in Tony. So he's the chief chocolate officer at the moment. And then from day one, he started luring me in. But I was quite happy as an independent consultant. So I was always an external consultant to Tony's until about 5 years ago, when he really managed to lure me in full time. And I became first I was doing what I'm doing now. So as we say, Choco evangelist. Then at a certain point, I became HR director in Tony's. When, by the way, the first thing I did was to throw the term HR overboard, because I think human resource is the most dehumanified word in the world. So I started calling that people and culture. I ran that for a while, and then I became full-time free bird, the chocolate evangelist of Tony's, when we really became this international brand. And instead of just traveling Holland to Belgium, I then started traveling the world and the galaxy and beyond to spread this story of cocoa and of chocolate. So that is how I got involved at Tony's. And what keeps me engaged, honestly, is that and I think this goes for the majority of people within Tony's, is that it is a great privilege and a great source of energy to work for such a purpose-driven company, to really work towards something that delivers personal meaning to myself of making a change in the world, where we see things happening that are actually paying off, where we see lives improving, but also where we see that what I'm really proud of is not the fact that we've grown so quickly or that we've become a global brand. Honestly, I don't give a rat's ass about us becoming a global brand. I care about us forming a global change from movement within the cocoa industry, but even bigger and broader than that. Because about 5 years ago, I would hear people saying, we want to become the Uber of, or we want to become the Airbnb of. And now I take quite a bit of pride, and maybe that's my ego speaking, when I hear people saying we want to become the Tonys of, which is I think a great example that we're doing something right and we're inspiring people to really make a change in their personal business maybe as well. That's
great. And I have to ask one silly question, maybe a half curious silly question. I mean, working at a chocolate company, how much chocolate do you eat per week? Is this like, does the lifestyle become also?
We have there's an interesting touch there. We have at Tony's a work contract, a legal contract which I'll show right now, which is a one-pager. It's just one A4, and we call it a ticket of trust. And in your contract, it specifically says that you can bring home as much chocolate from the office as you can physically carry each and every day. So to keep that slightly within boundaries, we also get free running shoes every year. We do online boot camp at yoga now as well. And I just wanted to obviously show you that I always have my personal stash right next to me without even having to walk to it. So yes, indeed, we do perhaps eat a bit too much chocolate, but I would call it more grazing. And on the business side, it's important that we also do our own taste test, obviously, Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I mean, you're working with education like we do our outreach. It's an abstract kind of very long-term kind of thing, and the chocolate is very like physical and it's present in the whole thing. The other half to the question I have to ask out of curiosity also is, during this pandemic period now, have your sales gone up a lot, or are people at home eating more chocolate, or is it basically the same?
This was a big question to us in the beginning. We had no idea where it was going. So the first thing we did was really take care of the team. Because at Tony's, we always say our team is on number one, because that's the only way we can reach that humongous mission of 100% slave-free chocolate, by having the most energetic, inspired, but also at the moment safe and healthy team, I would say. Second thing we did was obviously look out for the farmers and the cooperatives we worked with in Western Africa. So we launched an awareness campaign in Africa about personal hygiene, about washing your hands. We delivered soap dispensers and water dispensers. And the third thing was really take care of the business. How would that look? And we had no ideas. For example, the travel and duty-free has completely dried up. Right? There's hardly anybody traveling nowadays, and that is 6-7 million euros in revenue for our business. But at the same time, our web sales, our direct sales, have more than tripled. Have gone through the roof, because everybody is ordering chocolate for home, and it is a comfort food at home, and people are at home. So our growth path of last year that we had envisioned of 30% growth, we managed to meet exactly. So it has had an impact on our business on individual parts, but not on the overall growth.
Yep, that's interesting. And also, if we get into the more serious discussion, because it's also, I mean, setting a kind of a goal of having slave-free chocolate and developing a brand and all that becomes like that's something you do in the Netherlands, in Europe, and in that context. But how then in the production line, how involved are you on the ground in West Africa or the other places where you get the chocolate? And how present are you in that environment? And how much do you also work with local different actors, whether it's local government or local other institutions like schools and stuff? Because that also means, because you can rely on like standard kind of inspectors and those kind of things, but there's so many other things as well involved.
Yeah, all of the above, I would say. So what sets us apart from other companies as a whole is the fact that we do have traditional teams like the marketing team, the sales team, the operations team. What sets us apart, I think, are two teams within our company. One is the people and culture team. That's really what other companies would call HR. That's really working on the culture of the company. Because I think one of the biggest success factors within our company is the amazing work culture. And the second one is the impact team. So we have an impact team of, I think, 15 people at the moment that are constantly working on, one, the relationships with governments, with farmers, with cooperatives in Western Africa, but two, also working on governments in, say, the US, but also the EU member states, to up the pressure when it comes to either putting laws in place or making sure that laws are really maintained and enforced when it comes to human rights violations in value chains of companies. That's why we also have let me now do some blatant commercial already, why we have this petition going on where we want people to sign to really form part of that movement to up the pressure on those governments. So we are deeply involved, and also indeed people on the ground in Western Africa from the impact team, full-time over there. And it might be shocking what it was to us when I started in this business, that we speak to farmers there that have never ever seen representatives of any of the big chocolate companies that they know that they deliver cocoa beans to. because those companies just don't have direct relationships with these farmers. They don't care. They buy the beans directly from the world market instead of directly from the farmers. Which is a great excuse for them, because if you then ask those companies or confront them and say, right, is there any forced child labor in your chocolate? They say, we don't know, because we don't know where the beans comes from, because that is how the system works. And we disagree with the system working that way. So, and even worse, if you speak to those farmers in Western Africa, they may have grown cocoa beans for 3, 4, 5 generations and never ever tasted the end product, chocolate. So whenever we go there, we use our hand luggage for our clothing, and we fill our suitcase with 23 kilos of chocolate to be able to spread a bit of that love amongst the farmers in Western Africa as well.
And a follow-up on that as well. Have you been involved in other, I mean, there's always these, that's what I'm trying to get at as well. There's these layers of different issues overlapping, whether it's climate change, which of course, goes into this, whether it's the fossil produced or consumed in the delivery of systems, but also how climate is changing in West Africa and how that affects the cocoa. But then also slavery and conflicts locally in West Africa. So is that also something that you try to work with?
Definitely. So we're really proud of the fact that this year, for the 3rd year in a row, we were named the most sustainable company of the Netherlands by the Dutch consumer over fancy brands like Tesla and stuff like that, because we really also look after those things. But I have to say, our focus, definitely on the communication part, has always been to keep pushing on the issue of forced child labor instead of CO2 emissions or other sustainability parts, or ecological sustainability. But we are a climate neutral company. We make sure that all our cocoa beans that are shipped from Western Africa are shipped through the Good Shipping Program, thereby using only biofuels. We also started making our cocoa butter in Abidjan in Ivory Coast, reducing the CO2 emissions on the shipment of cocoa butter by 50%. We're looking at the packaging. We're improving the milk powder that we're using in our chocolate. So we're constantly looking at how we can improve that. We have this year GPS mapped all of the fields of the farms that we work with, so that we know that we're not part of the deforestation that's going on in Ivory Coast and Ghana for cocoa plantations, which is a big problem, and especially in Ivory Coast. So we're really looking at that as well. But we just know that the consumer in a supermarket reads an average of 7 words. So we try to keep it very simple in what we're communicating towards the consumer.
And maybe I can switch over here. Let's see if this works with sharing the screen, so we can also get a more of a global context of modern day slavery. And it's also interesting that for, I mean, I don't know how much we learned about slavery in school, but it was also very much it was an idea around that slavery ended, or that the attempts to end slavery was in the 19th century, and then maybe in some countries going into the 20th century. But basically it was something that ended. But then going back to these issues and getting older, realizing that modern day slavery is a huge problem with around, I think, 35 to 40 million modern day slaves. And as you talked about as well, with also kids being enslaved in conditions that are not so different from the 19th century or the long history of slavery. And this kind of world map maps out, and it's also very different. Maybe I should say something about that as well, that it's, for example, in the Middle East, it's a lot around domestic work that people are enslaved in. In India, I think it's both that, but also in the mines, unsafe mines, for example. There's all sorts of slavery going on. And also in China, you have these basically slave camps of people that are in the Xinjiang province that are under this oppression. So there's all sorts of things. And then, of course, there's the agricultural farming kind of slavery that you have like in West Africa, but it also is in the US and in Europe when it comes to the vegetables that we consume. So you have this kind of huge picture of, or this world map of slavery in different aspects. So how do you feel? Do the business model you talked briefly about that you have at Tony's? I mean, is that something also that could be adapted to rather like large scale? I mean, farming is the closest thing. It's something that's being farmed or produced in another country and then imported to Europe, for example. So could your business model also be something that could be used for agriculture products and food in general, or if we talk about other commodities?
I think so. I think so. In the end, what we tried to show is that within our industry, where it was always said it's impossible, we showed that it is possible. And in the end, it just comes down to taking responsibility for your value chain, opening it up, making it transparent to consumers, and showing where there's an issue. And if on one side of the value chain there's brands or manufacturers that have millions or billions of profits, whilst at the beginning of the value chain there are people that can hardly eat on a daily basis, then that's ridiculous. And it's something you can solve by digging deeper into your own value chain and making sure that you eradicate those situations. So yes, I think it's replicable. And even within our industry, it was always said, yeah, but this is a tiny company in Amsterdam, and it's not scalable. And that is the reason why we want to be a financially successful company as well, because then we can show that within their business mindset, it is a scalable business. Then we became market leaders in the Netherlands, and then still it was, yeah, but it's a tiny company, and now we're available in 30 countries. Yeah, but so I wonder when they will stop saying that it's not scalable, and when they will stop saying it's only possible for a tiny company like ours. And yes, there's a long way to go, don't get me wrong. And yes, there are initiatives in place by other brands, but it's not enough to really make the change on the ground that we need to see. And it shows in the latest reports that the issue is still very big in those countries.
Yeah, and we're going to take a question from the chat in a minute. But a follow-up on that is also that, I mean, whether it's fair trade or eco products within food or like luxury things like chocolate, it's been also critiqued that maybe the middle class or upper middle class, upper class people with money basically can pay those the extra costs that these products also cost. So if you have an eco wine or have chocolate or other things, that's something that the middle class and upwards can afford, but you're missing that aspect of the other side of the population. But how much more?
I disagree there, Daniel,
Yeah.
because a couple of facts. One, I don't think sustainable is more expensive, period. I think you can find different ways of making sure that sustainability doesn't become more expensive. For example, in our case, we are content with the lower net margin that we make as a company. Thereby the prices don't need to go up. Last year, when Albert Heijn, the biggest retailer in the Netherlands, joined our platform, the open chain platform, all of their bars started to be sourced through the same 5 principles that we adhere by. Their bars didn't become much more expensive than 8 to 10 cents per bar, which shows that within their business model, within their revenue model, within their margin model, you don't need to become very much more expensive, and consumers appreciate that. And at the same time, this is also an argument that the industry uses, that they would outprice themselves if they were to pay a fair price, which I think in itself is a ridiculous idea, right? So you need to maintain this modern slavery to maintain the price that you have. To me, that just doesn't make sense. But then I also showed them to the fact that 2 or 3 years ago, the world market prices of cocoa plummeted due to several reasons, political reasons, also expectancy of the crop of that year. And then you would expect that within their reasoning that the price of chocolate bars in the supermarkets would also become cheaper, but they didn't. So the margin that was left between the chocolate sold on the shelves and the money that went to the farmer was about $8 billion US. Where did that go? That went to the pockets of chocolate manufacturers. So if they then say at this time that it would become too expensive for them to do, I say, well, start using up that 8 billion first, and then we talk.
Yeah, that's really true. And I mean, the richest people in the world are not getting poorer by the year. They're getting richer, and especially now during the pandemic.
Let's look at the last 6-7 months, right? I mean, there's hundreds of millions of people that lose their job, and the 6 richest people in the world have become 30% more rich.
And it's also another thing I've seen they've done with coffee is that they made a slightly smaller package. So it's not even noticeable, but it is like 50 grams or something. And you would roughly have the same price, or it's a bit more expensive. And that goes, maybe coffee and chocolate is not something you waste that much of, but if you have other foods, it's a lot of food waste, and maybe cutting back on the size of certain like packages would be also something that would level out the prices. But you're correct that, I mean, the profits that are taken out is something, of course, that could be less in that sense as well. Okay, so we have a hard question from the chat. You can see it there as well. But what do you think needs to be done to get rid of child labor? How much impacts do the average consumer have? And what type of feedback have you got from other chocolate companies or authorities, negative, positive? What is your biggest challenge going forward? So that's like 4 questions. So just
yeah, exactly. Ronja, well done, getting all those questions into one. So let's take them from the top, and I don't find they're that hard. What needs to be done? Let's see whether I can open that one up again for us a second. Because this is really the strategy we strongly believe in. So that is taking responsibility for your full value chain. That's number one. So not hiding behind reasons of the world market and our beans are sold in the world market. This is how cocoa works. No, direct relationships with those farmers. Why? Because then you can pay that higher price to those farmers. So 2 would really be pay a fair price for the resources that you buy from them. And also don't force them to always need to think in a short-term manner, but really build long-term relationships with those suppliers. Build that stable, direct relationship with those suppliers. We also think that you can help those farmers increase their productivity and quality that they deliver. But mind you, if all cocoa manufacturers or cocoa farmers start improving their productivity, then the market price would probably also go down. So we would prefer that you help certain cocoa farmers out of cocoa in itself and towards a crop that might be better for them to produce overall. And then also work together with the cooperatives that these are united. These people are united. So these 5 steps, we really think are the essential steps towards that future that we envision. So that is my answer to the first part of your question. What needs to be done? People need to be aware. That's the first thing, right? Consumers need to be aware, because I do think the average consumer has an impact. How? It's not just that you vote every 4 or 6 years. I think you vote every single day with the decisions you make in front of a supermarket shelf. Anything that you put in your shopping basket is a vote for the world you want to live in. Or as I read the other day, a very interesting meme online, it said, if you want them to stop producing crappy stuff, then simply stop buying crappy stuff. It is that simple. We all have power, because we probably more have power than the politician by simply making a different decision when we stand in front of the shelves. So then her third question, what type of feedback do we get from other chocolate companies or authorities? Well, there was a wise guy in India a long time ago who said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then you win. And I think we went from being ignored to winning quite quickly. And we've shown that consumers really want to make that positive change. People really embrace the fact that they can indulge themselves with a delicious good like chocolate and still do something right for the planet and the society around them. So we have gotten feedback, we have gotten criticism, but in the end, we've shown that we believe that really this is the way to go and that consumers agree with us. We work together with chocolate companies, eager, because we know that only together can we make all chocolate 100% slave-free. This is not about us. This is really about the movement we're trying to form together with the rest of the industry. So there's feedback left and right, and there's also from our side, we always play that same role in the industry as well. We have a lot of criticism towards other chocolate manufacturers, but at the same time, we know that we need them to change their ways to really make possible what we want to do. So what is our biggest challenge going forward? I would say really making sure that other manufacturers join us in doing this. I think really making them see that this is the way to go, because even though I think at the moment 38%, for example, of the chocolate on shelves in Holland is certified, whether fair trade or UTZ certified or Rainforest Alliance, You don't see that 38% reflected on the ground in Western Africa. So there's a lot of stuff to be done in the whole system. And the second challenge that we have as a company simply is really the internationalization. We have an office in the US now. We have an office in two offices in the German region, office in London, office in Amsterdam. So for us, being able to roll this out internationally is a challenge, especially at the moment, right? We have a pop-up store in Japan at the moment where no Tony's has been able to go to, so it's all been remote. And that is a bit of a challenge, honestly, at the moment. And obviously, as Ronja said, well, the climate issues that we're facing, but I think we're doing a proper job there, even though I still consider ourselves quite a linear product. It's very hard to make a circular product out of chocolate, honestly.
Okay, thanks. And keep asking your questions in the chat, or if you want to jump into the discussion. So I think we can move into more of maybe the economic and the political area. And there's, over the last 1 or 2 years, there's been a lot of talk about the new Green Deal, both in the US. It's an old idea as well, but it's popped up again, and also in the EU. And it's also been very much connected to what happens after the pandemic and how the economy or the economic system could be restructured. And you have a different business model within the same kind of economic system that everybody else kind of lives within. But how would you see that different, I mean, legislation or taxes, or when it comes to duties for importing certain goods, or how politics could help the kind of business that you're doing and also that others can copy? Because it seems fairly, as you described it, at least easy for other companies to copy what you've done. But are there clear kind of things that you and your work have come across that could be made easier by political legislation or decisions?
Honestly, in the last 20 years, all agreements have all been voluntary agreements. And every time the chocolate industry was saying, yeah, we're going to solve this ourselves, we're going to set up a protocol. And in the end, on the ground, things haven't changed. And that is a clear wake-up call. And that is also why we've launched this petition, to make sure that really legislation is in place, that due diligence is being done by organizations, is forced for them to be done, to show that there's no human rights violations in their value chains. So it's really time, I would say, that the gloves come off and that we make this more seriously through legislation, because the era of voluntary agreements is over, in our opinion. And a second comment to your introduction as the Green New Deal is that, for example, I don't call ourselves a social enterprise. Why? Because I believe that every organization that is financially successful simply has a moral obligation to the society and the planet that they operate in, to do something right with that financial success. And those organizations and entrepreneurs that don't take that moral obligation seriously, in my opinion, should be called anti-social enterprises. So instead of putting ourselves on the fringes in the niche of entrepreneurship, e.g. social entrepreneurship, I think we should consider ourselves the new norm and the mainstream, and start pushing out anti-social entrepreneurs towards the fringes. In my humble opinion, that would be a more logical option.
Yeah, and also connected to that, I mean, minimum wage has also been discussed, at least in the US, but also like the right for kids to go to school. So that could also be something, I mean, on an EU level, you could make legislation around that. These kind of products that we import, they have to be, that would make a huge impact on a lot of different ways, but also in like we talked about a while ago, when it comes to minimum wage for migrant workers in the farming industry, for example. But also, I mean, it might be a given also that you can just legislate that kids should not work within certain.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the thing is, I mean, locally in Ivory Coast and Ghana, that is the law. But we need a government that also enforces that law. And at the same time, you also need an escape for these farmers, because if I tell a farmer that they need to send their kids to school, and he looks at me and he says, but the nearest school is 30 kilometers down the road, then he obviously has a logistical issue in itself. So then we have 1% of our total revenue goes to the Tony's Foundation, and the Tony's Foundation builds schools in those communities where there are no schools, and those schools are open to everybody in that community, whether they deliver beans to Tony's or not. So yeah, there's a solution there. And in our case, for example, you mentioned minimum wage. For us, that's a living income reference price, because we work with independent entrepreneurs, these cocoa farmers, and they don't work for an employer, so to speak.
I'm also curious, since we're within this university context with both education but also research and all of that. I mean, how do you benefit from like a very developed university and research kind of environment, both in the Netherlands but also in Europe in general? And what kind of collaborations or connections do you have to universities and the work that they do?
We use reports from Tulane University that does research in Western Africa. I personally have a background in teaching at university, and therefore at a certain point in time at Tony's, when we started to stray away from universities, because we said the students know us already, we need to reach other people. I turned that around again, saying, yes, but hold on, this is where the entrepreneurs of the future are born. And that is where we need to bring in a bit of our knowledge towards these students and universities, to show that social entrepreneurship, sustainable entrepreneurship, isn't a boring socialist thing. It's the new way of the future. It's the path of 21st century capitalism, I strongly believe. So I very much love to work together with universities, and also universities of applied sciences in the Netherlands, and even high schools at times. We have a teaching case that universities can use. We have an MBA teaching case that MBA universities can use, etc. So I love education. It's my personal love, baby, I got to tell you.
Yeah, and I think it's also that CMS in the education, the courses we do, but also universities in general, whatever issue it is, we're really good at describing and in many cases understanding the problems, but also framing the problems, which I think is correct, as sometimes almost insolvable. But I think what is lacking, there's good research being done, and research groups, and also maybe a few educational examples, but not many of actually working together with different examples or different people that are already trying things out, and like you have done as well. And it's also you have an initiative that has worked over 15 years, and it seems to be that the business model, as we talked about, can also kind of exist within a traditional economic system. So that, I mean, that is hopeful. Then again, we also, as a university and as CMS, we always, that's why I also named this critical conversation, and also trying to get more in depth in the conversation as well. So I think we should do maybe have a small break, get a cup of coffee, or in your case, maybe you can have some chocolate. That's one of the drawbacks of having everything online. When you invite people working with food or things they can actually bring with them, you can't really translate the chocolate through this online digital way.
Exactly.
No, that's kind of hard. But let's do, I think maybe 5 minutes is okay. I think we'll wrap up a bit early before 4 o'clock, but let's do 5 minutes. So let's reconvene 3:05. See you in a while.
Cool.
Okay, so we're back. I also try to pick up if there are questions on Facebook. You can ask them in the comment section on the live recording or the live broadcasting post on Facebook if you want to ask questions. So that's good. And also the rest of you joining in via Zoom, you can ask your questions directly or in the chat if you have any questions as well. I think we covered a lot of ground, and it's also that you presented a pretty solid case of the work that you do and all those things as well. But have you, over the history that you worked, I mean, it's 15 years, have you received reports from producers about any work-related problems, or that the actual chocolate that you received that's being produced have been not produced in the way that you wanted to be produced? and how do you deal with that kind of reporting? I mean, how do you get feedback from people on the ground of conditions that are not
well? There's a scientific answer and there's the heartfelt answer. And the heartfelt answer, and why do I say this? Because about a year ago, I was at a conference in a panel discussion, and somebody next to me said, should things be noticeable or should they be measurable? And I love that, because in my humble opinion, it should be at least measurable before, or noticeable before it's measurable. Let me put it like that. But when you become an international company, and definitely when you start working in more Anglo-Saxon countries, you need to also show the proof of the pudding, so to speak. So what we have is a couple of systems in place. One is the bean tracker, which is for us the way to really track and have that full insight into the value chain. So we know exactly, we always say we know where our beans are bean to bar. So we know where our beans comes from, what cocoa farmer, up to batch levels chocolate, so to speak. But then there's also the social side and the social measuring. And this is through the CLMRS, which is the Child Labor Monitoring and Remediation System. A very unsexy name, but it's a system that we have in place and we put in place through the International Cocoa Initiative, where we work together with Nestle, for example. And that is locals that go around, that interview people, that interview kids, and they log any incidents they run into. So even a child walking around with a machete, which is considered illegal, but it's not considered modern slavery, for example. So we logged those incidents, and in the last fiscal year, we ran into 259 of those cases. So that means, for example, kids that are carrying too heavy weights, that don't have protecting clothing, that use a machete, or kids that lack a birth certificate, or kids that don't have health insurance. So then we help them put health insurance in place. We help them with bicycles. We help them with wheelbarrows to carry stuff, because some kids are old enough to help mom and dad work on the farm, but they shouldn't be. They're not old enough to carry weights, or not old enough to work with this machinery, for example. We did not, in the last 2.5 years, run into any case of modern slavery at the corporations that we work with. That is not to say that it's not there, because then we would be making ourselves blind to the reality, because we believe there are these cases. That's why we never say that our chocolate is 100% slave-free, because I might consider it so, because we didn't run into any incidents in the last 2.5 years. But if you start screaming that, then if you run into a case that people would say, hey, you were lying to us all the time. We're not. We know that there are incidents there. But fortunately, we didn't run into any cases of modern slavery, but we want to find them, because if we were to find them, we can solve them. That is exactly why we want to find them, which might sound slightly contradictory, but we'd rather find them and have a case than not find them and know that there's a hidden case somewhere, because a farmer is afraid to speak up because he's afraid to lose his certification, so to speak. So there's those systems that we have in place. That's a long answer to a simple question you had.
Yep. Are there more questions from the people attending? I have not seen any. I posted the links in the post here on Facebook as well. So I think that's good that there's more things you can engage with. And I know also for the master's program in sustainable development, they have the option to go on a internship for a full semester or a half semester. So that might be interesting also for master students. Yeah, so I think this is really good. There is a ton of different things we can go further in, but we have the links as well that you posted. So I think we can kind of call it a day unless there are more questions. And I'll ask you a brief final question also. So if we imagine, because we can imagine like a very dark and dystopian world, that's kind of like it's unfolding every day. And for the people living in slavery and that have lived in slavery and then are living in slavery, they're already living in that dystopian world that we in this Western kind of part of the world kind of look upon what climate change will be, this dystopia if we don't do this. But a large part of the world's population is also living in really dystopian and hard conditions. So we shouldn't lose track of that. But if you kind of paint a vision of the world becoming better through your work, but also others' work in the world, and you kind of reach that the chocolate industry and other industries changing in the right direction. What kind of world, if you would paint like a hopeful world or a hopeful kind of vision for the world of chocolate, but also maybe beyond that as well?
Yeah. Well, honestly, Daniel, I envision a society and an economy, because that is my background, that is much more inclusive, that is much more equally distributed, without losing sight of the potential of commercial forces and entrepreneurship. But I think we've slightly lost sight of what we're here for as entrepreneurs. We've slightly lost sight of the fact that financial success is not an end goal; it's a means towards a goal. The goal is that better society that we can create together. So I think, you know, we can indeed be very depressed and gloomy about where this world is going to, because rightly so, over the last couple of decades, we made a bit of a mess out of it. But at the same time, always when I talk to students, I use the wise words of a book that I once read that ended, and it said, you know, I do not know what the future holds, but I do know who holds it. And those are the entrepreneurs of the future that are watching this right now. And there's you could consider that it's a mess that that my generation have given you, but at the same time, you could also say that there's never been a generation that had so much opportunity and potential to really make a difference in the world, which is right now.
Yeah, and that's very true. And I think also there's a lot of lessons in all of this, because we in this conversation, what we also focused in part on is like the standards of how well you are doing your work and how much of the chocolate is actually slave-free or it's done in the right way. But there's also, looking back at SEMAS and the education we do, or the research being done at the Uppsala universities here, but also in other universities around the world, there isn't much look on the actual work that we do, because it's been this general kind of idea that everything with education is good for the world and everything with research is good for the world, but that's not really the case. So I think also we can learn a lot from the kind of the standards we put on companies like yours as well, or others, and also having critical conversations of what we do with education and research, and a lot of other things in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's perfect. There's always a certain Zoom tiredness being in these boxes. But I remember also before the pandemic being tired of being in rooms and having meetings sometimes
Exactly.
with people.
Nothing changed there, right?
Yeah. So I remember that as well. But this is good, and it's good also that we can connect with the world, although the Netherlands is not that far away. But and hopefully with coming vaccines, and we will be let out of this world. But hopefully also we just don't go back to that strange normal that was before all of this.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Ynzo, for taking part in this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and the technology worked, and the dog only barked once, at least on sound. So that's good.
That's good. That's how life is nowadays, which is good, right?
Yeah.
Our dogs are part of our lives as well.
Yeah, they are. They're having the best time of their lives because nobody leaves the home now. So that's good. Okay, so thanks everybody that's been watching on Facebook and the people participating here in Zoom. And keep up the good work. And one small chocolate bite at a time. We're kind of getting there. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.